In just a little bit. So welcome. Thank you for attending our webinar. Let's head to the next slide. So you have found us through AAIDD and the Institute on Community Integration. Welcome to our webinar series, Black Lives with Intellectual and Developmental Disabilities and Their Faith Communities. This is a discussion of the role of church communities in the lives of Black and Brown people with IDD and their families. This is the first session in a 4-part webinar series that explores the intersection of faith, race, and disability. This webinar is brought to you by AAIDD's Religion and Spirituality Interest Network and the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Sarah Hall, and I will be your moderator today.
So you're no longer wanting to stay.
I am a researcher at the University of Minnesota, and I'm the current chair of the Religion and Spirituality Interest Network. I am here today with my colleague, Deborah Fisher, who will introduce our speakers and facilitate the conversation. Also, my colleague, Chet Cheddar from the University of Minnesota, will be monitoring the chat today. If you're having technical difficulties, you may email Chet, and she will put her email in the chat for you. So the structure for today's webinar will include about 25 minutes of content and maybe 15 minutes for conversation and questions at the end. This webinar is being recorded and will be available in the future on the Religion and Spirituality Interest Network's website. The web address is on the screen and will be sent to you in our follow-up email. Next. Okay. I would like to provide you with some information about how you may use Zoom during our session today. So please keep your microphone on mute to help reduce background noise. Then also you'll see at the bottom in the middle, the chat function. It looks like a little speaking bubble. If you have questions or something you want to add to the discussion, you can use the chat. And then my colleague Chet will monitor it throughout the session. Please feel free to send questions at any time during the presentation. Also at the bottom of your screen, you'll see closed captioning has been turned on. You can turn the subtitles on and off by clicking on the live transcript function at the bottom. So you have an option to show subtitles, and if you change your mind, you can hide the subtitles later. You may also click on show full transcript to see the running transcript on the side. Next. So the Religion and Spirituality Interest Network is an interfaith, interdisciplinary association that seeks to advocate for the opportunities and supports needs for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to express their spiritual and religious interests, needs, and gifts, and to assist service providers and congregations in embracing inclusion. Membership in this interest network includes access to the Journal of Disability and Religion. And then also there's a lot of different activities that we do throughout the year. At the AAIDD conference, the Interest Network hosts a dinner, business meeting, and a post-conference session. Each year, the Interest Network presents the Henry Nowen Award at the AAIDD conference. And we have a website and Facebook and Twitter to share information. You may also find our action plan and links to our website and Facebook page on the Interest Networks page of the AAIDD website. Next. Now I will turn it over to Deborah Fisher to introduce our speaker.
Hello, everybody, and thank you so much for being here. Thank you, Sarah. It is really a privilege to introduce you to today's speaker, Dr. Luchara Wallace. Dr. Wallace is the director of the Lewis Walker Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnic Relations and an associate professor in special education, where she leads research and advocacy on topics such as juvenile incarceration, generational wealth attainment, and policies impacting families and individuals with disabilities. Prior to her appointment as director of the Walker Institute, Dr. Wallace taught courses in the Learning Disabilities Endorsement Block and was a co-principal investigator on the Turnaround School Leaders Project, which was a federal grant designed to turn around priority schools and develop a leadership pipeline within the partner districts. Dr. Wallace is currently engaging in research related to the development of an off-campus alternative to school suspension in an effort to interrupt the school to prison pipeline for at-risk middle and high school students. Most recently, Dr. Wallace developed a summer youth employment program based upon preliminary results from the alternative to school suspension research and feedback from incarcerated youth. For 5 years, Dr. Wallace dedicated herself as a full-time teacher in both elementary and secondary classrooms. Throughout her career, she has coordinated programming to support students with learning disabilities as well as emotional and behavioral disorders. The programs offered to students focused on empowering them by teaching tools of self-advocacy and independent learning. Dr. Wallace's passion for family and policy studies is a continuation of her desire to support individuals and families with disabilities in creating the life they aspire to have. Dr. Wallace is also interested in determining the ways families learn about the policies that impact them and how that knowledge impacts their family's quality of life. As a member of the faculty, Dr. Wallace has multiple opportunities to advise and mentor both undergraduate and graduate students preparing to become special educators, as well as students engaged in the work of the Lewis Walker Institute. Thank you, Dr. Wallace.
Thank you, Deborah. It's such an honor to be here, everyone. Today, I really want to focus on a topic that is near and dear to my heart, and that is to be Black and Christian with a disability. And the subtopic or the subtitle is We Are One Body. And this work has actually been a part of, this focus and emphasis has been a part of my work for over 15 years at this time, when I really look at that intersectionality between intellectual and developmental disability, as well as the experience of individuals, regardless really of their race and ethnicity. But there are a few things that I think it's important for us to remember as we add race and ethnicity into the equation. So the first thing that I want to share with you is a phrase that I have learned recently, but I have fully adopted, and that is Dumela. Dumela is a term from Botswana, and it typically means good day. So it's used as a greeting. But in this context, Dumela means I affirm you, I believe in you, and I see great potential in you. And when I think about how we can best engage our brothers and sisters within our faith communities, it is vitally important that we invest in and embrace the spirits of Dumela. We want to affirm our brothers and sisters. We want to believe in their abilities and their contributions and see the great potential that they provide, that we all provide as a part of our faith communities. And the reason that I focus on that is because I fundamentally believe in the Gospels, and I fundamentally believe in the letter of Paul to the Corinthians, where he reminds us that we truly are one body. Now, there's one song that I absolutely adore that, to me, highlights what this means. And so if you'll just bear with me for a couple of moments as I share the first few bars of this song, we'll come back and look at exactly what we are one body means.
are one body in Christ, and we do not stand alone. We are one body in Christ, and He came that we might have life. For He tells us, when you eat my body and you drink my blood, I will live in you and you will live in my love. When you eat my body and you drink my blood, I will live in you and you will live in my love. We are one body in Christ, and we do not stand alone. We are one body in Christ, and He came that we might have life.
Now, I could continue and share the entire song, but I recognize that we have limited time together. And you'll see as the phrase it's popped up currently on the screen says, can you hear them crying? Can you feel their pain? And it continues to ask another series of questions. But the core of what I want to share with you is that we truly are one body. And in 1 Corinthians chapter 12, verses 12 through 27, it reminds us that we cannot function without one another. And if one part of our body is absent, then we are less. We are not complete. We are no longer whole. And I really want to emphasize today that the importance and the value, no matter what your faith is, no matter your race or ethnic background or identity, if we are not together, if we do not see the value in one another and how we complete one another, then that is truly a loss for us in our faith communities. So another thing that I wanted this. One of the things that I want to remind us is when we think about, well, why does it matter how we embrace or whom we embrace? Well, I just want to bring up a few statistics. As a researcher, I love numbers and I like to share numbers to support some of what I'm saying. And let's just remember 26%, or approximately 1 in 4 of all American adults have a disability, period. And not only is it 26% or 1 in 4 of all American adults, but if we think back to the opening phrase that the opening paragraph in the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, we're reminded that disability truly is a natural part of the human condition, and that it in no way diminishes the rights of individuals to participate in or contribute to society. So as a result, it doesn't matter what our challenges might be. The fact is we're all going to have a disability and experience a disability at some point. And it really doesn't matter what that disability is. We have something to contribute. And so that's really the core of what I want to share and that I want for us to discuss today is our contributions and how we can maximize the ability of our brothers and sisters. Now, I would say our brothers and sisters in Christ, but I know that we have many individuals of many faith denominations that are represented on this call today. And so how do we represent or how do we support our brothers and sisters to fully engage in the life that they have been called to lead and to also share the gifts that they have been given? Now, there's something that I want for us to consider because I know that those numbers were just not enough. You need a few more statistics. So let me share a few with you. A couple of things to consider. There are over 385,000 places of worship in the United States. Now, I recognize post-COVID, some of those numbers may have decreased, but let's just use this general number. There are 385,000 places of worship in the United States across denominations and beliefs. 80 to 85% of those churches do not have any type or any level of special needs ministry, and many have very limited capacity to provide any sort of accommodations. Let me just let that sit for a minute. 80 to 85% of our churches do not have any type or any level of special needs ministry or capacity to provide accommodations to any of their community members who might have a disability. According to the Banquet Network, more than 90% of church-going parents of children with special needs cite that the most helpful support is a welcoming attitude towards individuals with disabilities. 90% of parents, and I know that this says parents of children, but in a lot of faith communities, parents and even their adult children also worship together. And so the concern or the desire for the majority of parents is that their children with a disability experiences a welcoming attitude towards them within that faith community. But interestingly enough, even though 90% of church-going parents shared that that was their desire, simply to have a welcoming attitude towards individuals with disabilities. We didn't even talk about ministry. We haven't even said we're going to do something to make sure and ensure that individuals are able to have their needs met spiritually. Simply a welcoming attitude is what's being requested, but only about 80% admitted to experiencing such. 90% said, we just simply want a welcoming attitude. Only 80% could say that's been our experience. Oh, that's not what I meant to do. So I'm sorry. In case you would like to see the further, that article in more depth, this is a link to that article. So if you'll forgive me, if you'll excuse me for 1 second, I'm going to figure out how to get back to my presentation. Who knew? There we go. Let's see. There we go. And I am now going to, Sarah, can you just confirm that you can actually see my presentation again?
Yes, I can.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. All right. So with that being said, here we go. With that being said, I would like to also share a bit of information about one of the research projects that I engaged in with one of my doctoral students. And we asked several questions. And so this was a comprehensive research project where we engaged in survey research. We collected pre and post data in terms of knowledge and understanding and experience of individuals with disabilities. And we also engaged in several other focus groups so that we could really kind of get down to the core of some of the needs of particular churches, especially African-American churches, and getting an understanding of how do we within the African-American community support individuals with disabilities. And so one of the questions that we asked in that particular research was, how could we make our congregation more inclusive and welcoming for people with mental health challenges and or special needs? So again, that's very much so connected to that previous question that we saw that said, what's one of the ways that we can make our churches more available and more welcoming? And what we found is some of these recommendations bubbled up. And I think that it seems so simple, yet it is so profound. And that is, when new members join, ask in a sensitive and dignified way if any accommodations would enhance their participation in the faith community. I mean, simply acknowledging that no matter how someone looks, no matter what you perceive their needs might be, offering that opportunity to provide and say, hey, these are the accommodations I need, or if I don't say that I need them, let's not make assumptions there. But I thought that was huge, that we were able to say that when those new members joined, that simply asking what types of accommodations would enhance their participation, that can go a long way. A second point that I found to be really profound in this study was that it was to state that all are welcome. I mean, be very clear. We welcome everyone here. We want everyone to feel at home. And for some ministries, to provide a phone number if additional accommodations are needed in all of the church event announcements. So if you know there's going to be a movie night, if there's going to be, a special youth activity, allow families to be able to articulate, what are the accommodations that we need? Or let me call someone so I can find out what's the run of show, what is going to be on the meal or the snack choice. So that way, if my child is not able to eat that, I can supply something for them, or I can let the ministry know so that they can make sure that there's something that's appropriate for my child to be present there. As an aside, I can say that I've spent many years in ministry, especially in youth ministry. And most recently, I've spent the past, 15 years or so in our church, working in our nursery ministry. And that has got to be one of the most magical and amazing ministries in which to work. And frequently, for me at least, it's so fulfilling. And one of the things that I truly have been blessed by is when we have our children, our babies to come and see us, it doesn't really matter, what their needs are. We make sure that those needs are met. And that's one of the things that we try to do in every document that we produced and that we developed. We, and as a part of their registration form, what special accommodations are needed, what special dietary habits are necessary, what allergies might your child have or experience, and how are they impacted? Is it, aerosol? Is it, food ingestion? Is it contact? What is it? And we've learned how to ask those questions in a dignified manner so that no matter what the issue, challenge, or need is for the child that's coming in, we're able to meet it. And we are ferocious at making sure that we're meeting all of their needs. And so as soon as we begin to develop those kinds of habits across our ministries, that's when we're starting to see success. And I have to say that early on, when I first came to my current ministry, so here in the Kalamazoo, Michigan area, when I first joined our ministry, we were asking the questions. So what ministry is available for individuals with developmental disabilities? We had a sign ministry because we had several members of our congregation who had a hearing impairment or who were deaf, and needed the sign translation ministry. But we didn't really have any other ministries. And so it's been really amazing to see how over the past 11 years that we've been in the Kalamazoo area, that we've seen our ministries to individuals with disabilities grow and increase. We have a large number of individuals who are blind or who have low vision, who attend our church, who attend our faith community, because they know that their needs will be met there. And it's a very natural experience. And so it's not, let's just put all the individuals with disabilities over here in this corner, but it's a natural integration across our ministry, down to the faith communities that we have and some of our Sunday school classes that are offered. So it's been really awesome how we've really tried to change and update how we connect with individuals. Another point that emerged out of this research was to personally invite individuals with mental health challenges or special needs and their families to participate in ministries, religious education programs and events, and specifically arrange for accommodations. Frequently, we find that families sometimes don't participate because they're not asked. How often are families and children left out because no one even said, we want for you to come and play with us. We want for you to participate with us. We want for you to tell me, how can we make this a more inclusive experience? And if I were to take that one step further, one of our friends, we had a group outing where we were going to go attend a play. And within that play, we knew that for one of the members of our community, that being within the auditorium was going to be totally auditorially overstimulating for her daughter. And so we were planning for this all along. And so what we did is we said, okay, we know that maybe coming in and sitting in the audience to watch this play might be overstimulating. But we also know that there's a special room that has a closed circuit television where you can see the entire play and you can have all the snacks that you want and that you need within that space. And that's a way for you and for your daughter to be able to connect and see the play, experience the play with the rest of us, and we come back and forth and, you know, enjoy the snacks and have fun. You know, you got to have that too. But that's a way for us all to have a shared experience, but acknowledging that the same experience does not necessarily mean that that's equality or that's the most beneficial. And so that's another way that we've been trying to make sure that as we develop and look at the various accommodations and arrangements that we can make, that we're thinking about those things on the front end as opposed to on the back end. In my church, we're loud. We are very loud, praise and worshiping congregation. We love to shout and to sing. And we also recognize that, again, for some families, that is overstimulating. So we do have a secondary chapel, again, that has a closed circuit television where members and families where they may feel overstimulated can sit and still can enjoy the worship service and experience, again, that common shared faith experience without necessarily being overstimulated in that primary area. When we talk about faith and we talk about what it means to be a Black person of faith, I saw this and I just had to share it. So just indulge me for a minute because this speaks to so much of why we're having this conversation. This speaks to so much of why it's important for us to remember and remain centered that we are one body. And we cannot have a disproportionate representation or a disproportionate number of our community members whose needs are not being met. And so I just want to share this with you because it really touched my heart. And it says, believe in ability means that Black lives matter. Act with compassion means that Black lives matter. Enable excellence means that Black lives matter. Foster collaboration and build community means that Black lives matter. Promote advocacy means Black lives matter. Take responsibility means Black lives matter. Now, I know for some, the phrase Black Lives Matter can be a hot button phrase, but what I want for you to understand is that so much in our society, as well as in how we address disability within our communities, individuals who are Black, individuals of color, are systematically not receiving the supports and services that they need, that they require in order to be successful, in order to be able to live out and contribute to our communities. And so it's not saying that someone else's life does not matter. It's not saying that someone else is not equally important. What we're saying is that sometimes, because we continue to see a systemic, a continual lack of provision, not only in church, not only in school, but in how we are meeting our medical needs, how we're meeting the needs of individuals who might be seeking employment, we're still continuing to see disproportionate numbers in a way that is negatively skewed for individuals who are Black or brown. And so I wanted to share this because I felt that it put so much into perspective. And I just hope that this is something that you'll consider as we continue this conversation to talk about how can we incorporate and be more inclusive in our faith communities. Well, we've got to believe in ability. We've got to act with compassion. We have to enable excellence. We have to foster collaboration and build community, promote advocacy, and then we take responsibility. I want to conclude right now my part of the presentation, and I want to say, Dumela, I affirm you, I believe in you, and I see great potential in you, because I know that you would not be here and you would not be joining us today if you did not have a heart and a desire to do even more. So thank you so much for being a part of today and this first of a series of 4 presentations that we're going to have and that we're going to discuss. And so right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn things over to Debbie and to my fellow panelists. Let's see here. So let me move this over and I'll stop sharing.
Thank you so much, Luchara. This was just fascinating and enlightening and uplifting. So thank you. I learned so much, and I'm sure all of our attendees did as well. As Luchara said, we will now turn to our future webinar presenters and panelists to join Luchara. They will start by addressing any questions or topics raised by your talk. And then we will ask our audience to be sure to enter questions you have in the chat, which Chet and I will pull together and ask on your behalf. Please accept our apologies in advance if we don't get to all your questions. We're trying to consolidate similar ones. Hold on to them because there'll be other opportunities. We will hold on to them and make sure that some of these topics come up in future webinars. And our fourth webinar will be a panel with all of our presenters, and that will be a chance to do both a deep dive into some of these topics that are raised, as well as come back to any questions that may have remained unanswered. So we hope this will be an opportunity for us to all learn and explore this very important topic. So with that, let me turn to our panelists who have joined us. Dr. Lamar Hardwick, lead pastor of Tri-Cities Church in East Point, Georgia, and Reverend Dr. Latanya Perry, senior pastor of New Mount Zion Baptist Church and executive director of Family Abuse Services in Burlington, North Carolina. Thank you for joining us. And would you like to start the conversation with Dr. Wallace?
Well, first, I would like to give my fellow panelists a chance to actually introduce yourselves so everybody can hear your voices. I see that there's a lot of questions that are populating in the chat. So thank you so much already for your engagement. I was getting nervous. I thought we were going to be quiet. So Dr. Penny, Dr. Hardwick.
I'll go ahead and introduce myself. Thank you for allowing me to be part of this panel today. And to my sorority sister, who I just realized is my sorority sister, you did a beautiful job this morning, or this afternoon. I am the pastor of New Mount Zion, excuse me, Baptist Church, and the executive director of Family Abuse Services of Alamance County. What most people don't know that I do is I'm a church consultant for the organization All Belong. And we specialize in helping churches create programs of inclusion with, not for, but with persons of varied abilities. And thank you for having me.
Well, thank you for having me, and Dr. Wallace, for your presentation. For those who are not familiar with me, my name is Lamar Hardwick. I am also known online social media as the Autism Pastor. I pastor a church in East Point, Georgia, which is just south of Atlanta, right next to the airport. And for the past, I'd say 5+ years, ever since I was diagnosed as an adult, my ministry has primarily been to the autism community, but also the disability community at large, and teaching churches like my fellow panelists how to become more inclusive of persons with all types of abilities.
Thank you. I'd like to start, if you don't mind, with a question perhaps for all of you in the context of Dr. Wallace's presentation and where she landed also at the end, which is, we know that different faith and ethnic groups respond to the needs of their communities in ways that are unique to them. Do you think, or can you share with us, the unique role for churches in Black and Brown communities, given the systemic racism and bias that has existed in our country for so long? And perhaps share with us how that you believe has impacted the relationship between the church and its disabled members.
Sure. Go ahead. I'll defer. Go ahead.
I was going to say, as a pastor and having grown up in the Black church in a smaller community, the Black church has always been the center of community for many neighborhoods and communities of color. We've been the hub. And I think it's so important as we talk about varied abilities in the Black church is that although we've been the hub of support for so many areas, we've never quite been the hub of support for those with disabilities because of some cultural issues of not naming the things that our children or adults may have, not naming our disabilities. However, I do believe if we ever get past the shame and move towards it being inclusive and move toward belonging, the Black church can be the hub for those with disabilities, their families, and be that nurturing support that it's been for so many other categories. When it comes to the civil rights movement, it started in the church. So where else is a better place for that movement for Black bodies of different abilities to get that support other than the church?
Yeah, I agree. And you mentioned the civil rights movement being born in the church. We also know that the disability rights movement is a child of the civil rights movement. So there's a natural connection there. I think one of the things that I see, as Dr. Penny stated, that the Black church has always been the hub. But there was a certain level of protection that the Black church needed to provide for its community because of systemic racism. And I think, to her point, that need for protection from and against insulated the Black church and the Black community from, and rightfully so, from some of the interpretation of certain behaviors. So for example, because autism is my thing, even though new data has showed that the diagnosis of young Black and Hispanic children has caught up with young white children in autism, one thing that they're not talking about is for those who don't have a co-occurrence of intellectual disability, there's still a gap. What that says is that it's almost fairly easy to diagnose a child that has a co-occurrence of intellectual disability, because you can see that when it's absent for persons like myself, it's harder to diagnose and the gap still exists. What that says to me is that in the absence of that, the same behaviors that Black and brown children display that would have gotten a white child diagnosed are interpreted as something different. And so we have a huge gap there. And I think some of that internally in the Black church is because we've had to insulate and protect ourselves from our behaviors and mannerisms being considered violent or aggressive because of systemic racism. And so while it protected us for a certain amount of time, what we've also found is that we haven't had the chance to really talk about in the Black community what some of those behaviors and patterns represent, so that we can get the type of support that is needed, especially early intervention. So it's been, in my estimation, almost a blessing and a curse. We've had to do it to protect our children, but we haven't had an opportunity to use what's happening on the inside of the church to get the support that could be useful for children at a young age.
Is it possible then that that has an impact on how the church communities will respond to the child with a disability, and going back to notions of belonging and acceptance, that the relationship that the community will then have to a child with a disability may be more confusing or difficult for the child and their family because of how the community is trying to protect them from undue labels, inappropriate labels, the fear of pathologizing when that has been part of the racial bias that has been built into our system so long historically.
I think that one of the, I thank you for asking that question, Debbie, because when we think about this whole fear of pathologizing, what ends up happening is frequently you'll say people won't label it, they won't name it, but there will be an identification. Oh, well, you know, that's just so-and-so. And this is how we deal with them, or this is how we handle them. And so what ends up happening is there is many times an unintentional marginalization of members of the faith community who are anything other, who are considered different. And one of the challenges becomes, especially if it is a disability where the child might act out more, might be maybe more audible in their responses. That's when you often see that kind of disconnect from the faith community. And so unfortunately, there's in many instances, I've seen families where they might first come to church and you might sit up front. And then if the child starts to act out, they systematically start moving farther and farther back until they're out the door. And then what ends up happening is you might see the parents, you might see the siblings, but then you don't see that family member with the disability anymore. And it's not until you start to ask specifically, and I'm very much so speaking from personal experience, you know, it's not until you start asking, where is so-and-so? We miss so-and-so. We want them here. We will provide natural supports. It's only when, and I actually would challenge the notion that this is only exclusive to the Black community. It's not. This is not something that's only unique to a Black church, but we have to be very intentional, and we have to let families know it's okay. It's all right if your child makes noises. Didn't you just hear me shout a few minutes ago? You know, it's okay if your child has to run around a little bit. We know what's going on. We will keep eyes and ears, you know, so sometimes there's that reassurance that's needed. And so I know I'm not exactly answering your question, but it's really kind of a combination of things. You know, there's a desire to not pathologize, but then we do, but we don't actually label it. And then we misunderstand what's going on because we're not talking about it. And so it's only when we open up that conversation that we start to see healing and we start to actually see engagement. Thank you.
And do you
And that's where we shift into belonging. So not just saying our doors are open and you're welcome, but we're making space for you to belong. That's the transition we've got to get to. We've done a lot of talking on inclusion and welcoming. It's one thing to say the door is open to you. It's another thing to say, we want you to feel like you're part of this community, embedded in this community, and we want to help you belong. And how do you see that? And in allowing that person a voice in the process, not creating that program for, but including them at the table to make decisions for themselves, to belong to a faith community, not demonize them or their behavior, because that is often done in the Black church, that speaking out and some of this bad behavior becomes demonized, or that language is used, but creating space of belonging. So I think we're all connecting on the exact same thing of opening the doors, allowing them to feel that you want them present, and moving to a space of belonging.
This is just so fascinating. Oh, Lamar, go ahead.
I would just quickly add, one of the things I often share with churches is that you can tell the organization's commitment to disability inclusion by their pathway to leadership. And so one of the beautiful things about the Old Testament, when King David went and got Mephibosheth, is that he didn't just sit him at the king's table. He actually gave him the land back that belonged to his family, which is very significant in their culture because it made him then an upstanding leader in the community. And I think it goes on to say that because of his reclaiming of the land, he was able to employ 30 people. And so it wasn't just, as Dr. Penny says, making room, it's making roots. And so I think a lot of times what ends up happening is the way that we do church, and this is just church universal, this is not just ethnic, the same types of voices are the ones who are creating the culture of what it means to do church, especially in the West. And so when you leave out the voices of the disabled, you end up with churches that are not inclusive of this disabled, because when you created those institutions, you didn't bring them to the table to have a voice and what it should look like. So those behaviors seem unordinary and seem abnormal because you've had all the same types of people saying this is what church should be. I think when we create a path to leadership for persons with disabilities to sit at the table, you'll start to see the unraveling of some unnecessary social norms that are often invisible barriers for persons with disabilities.
And there are a lot of questions in our chat box about how one goes about it. How does one both invite and engage the people and their families? How do we work with provider organizations and caseworkers? Where is the focus and the emphasis to ensure that we create our welcome in our communities to bring people in to form connected roles that allow them to become leaders, to join the voice of the future churches and faith communities? We have a lot of questions along those lines. It's almost the where to start. And we're just about out of time, so it's going to be hard to ask each of you to give a quick question, but I do want to reassure everybody that we will be getting to these topics in our next sessions, and we will also have a chance to go deeper into them. But I am going to ask each of you if you might just give a 30-second thought, and I'll give you a few seconds to organize your thoughts of your idea of where you might start or how you might respond to all of these very important questions about where do we begin and how do we do it with a recognition that our institutionalized racial biases have not just impacted people of color, but also the institutions and the churches and the faith groups that support them, and without even recognizing it, start to adopt some of those same biases. So the complexities of it are huge. There was one other question, Dr. Wallace, that referred to whether any of your data also broke out specific questions for people of color. And so I'm just trying to give you all a little bit of time to think about your answer. So with that, perhaps, Dr. Wallace, I'll let you start, and then Dr. Penny, and then Dr. Hart.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for lifting that question, Debbie. This question that specifically asked about my data. So the preliminary, the first slide of data that I provided is actually generalized data. But what we do understand is that the representation and the rate of disability is pretty consistent across all racial and ethnic groups. So if you're talking about 25% of any given population, whether it's Indigenous, African American, or what have you, it's going to be pretty consistent in terms of rates of disability. With that being said, the second set of data that I shared with you was actually data that was from a research study that we did do within a Black church community. And so therefore that was very specific to the experiences within the Black church in a Midwestern town. And so we did spend some time really trying to drill down deeper into people's thoughts and experiences. So of course, it may not all be generalizable, but I think it's absolutely worth considering, and it's very much so applicable. Now, getting back to your question in terms of, one thing that I want us to consider, whenever we think about bias and anti-bias and being, and developing an anti-bias kind of thought process, we first have to acknowledge that we have biases. We have to be able to start to analyze and acknowledge this is the issue that we have and why, because that's the first step towards making any changes. At least that's what I find. And so my very high level response, because I want to give the rest of the panelists an opportunity to share as well. My very high level response is, let's just see how well are we doing at creating that sense of belonging. And one way of looking at how well we're doing at creating that sense of belonging is by looking around those members of our faith community and saying, who is worshiping with us? And if we don't see other individuals worshiping with us that are not just like us, we're not doing a very good job of being welcoming and belonging. So that's my first thought.
Thank you so much. Dr. Penny.
So I would say that your first step is just like Dr. Wallace said, looking around you. As a pastor, it's easy to see from the pulpit, right? And as a mother of twins who both have their own disabilities, it's easy for me to spot things from the pulpit. As a previous educator, it's easy for me to see those things. But it must be led by caution in creating a sense of community for all. You start by including everyone. And that's a hard thing to do, but it's not a hard thing to do. If we're living based on the scripture, we are to include all people. So if we do that, we are creating that atmosphere that says everyone belongs. And then creating that communication of, if you need additional things to help you belong, we are ready for those conversations, getting people trained, getting people to understand what a church can do and how a church can successfully include people in their community.
Thank you. That's so helpful. And Dr. Hardwick.
Yeah, I would echo what my colleagues have said. Just a quick story. I once had a former church member who had a problem with the term autism pastor, which is not something I came up with. That was what a group of people came up with, and I just ran with it because it made it easier for me to find on social media. But my response to her was, it's only a problem if you think those two things don't go together. And so by saying that, my advice is to create space to begin to destigmatize disability in the church, particularly in the Black church and other ethnically diverse churches, because there still is a stigma that is there. And so to create some space to maybe have a Sunday or a month, or I also noticed that when I disclosed my diagnosis, it gave people in our congregation the freedom to disclose diagnoses that they were dealing with it, but they were too embarrassed to talk about. And so it's creating a space of transparency and vulnerability. You already have persons in your congregation, in your community that have disabilities who, because of stigmatization, are afraid to come. Those are the churches those are the people that Dr. Wallace says who kind of ease themselves out the door. So I would say create space, make it a normal part of the conversation at your church, and watch people surface who can also help you to become more inclusive by bringing them to the table and asking them what the needs are for that community.
Thank you so much. This is just, there's so much to continue to talk about, but you have just whet our appetite. We have a lot of questions. Sarah, you want to take it from here?
Yes.
And talk about what's coming next?
Okay, yes, thank you so much to all our panelists. This has been a great discussion, and we're learning more, but then also it's just the beginning. This is a discussion that has just started today, November 10th, but we have 3 more different webinars that are going to continue this discussion. Now, there were a lot of amazing questions that were posted today. We're going to save those questions, and we're going to make sure we cover those throughout. And so put it on your calendar. The next webinar is on December 1st at 3 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. And Dr. LaTanya Penny will be presenting, but then we will again have a conversation with all of our panelists. Then again on January 5th at 3 o'clock, Dr. Lamar Hardwick will present, and the rest of the panelists will discuss. And at the very last one, the closing panel, will be on February 2nd. And that's where we're really going to dive into all of the different questions, the different topics, areas that have come up, and really make sure we kind of close that loop. And even though it's closing the loop to this webinar series, I hope that it will open discussions within your faith communities, within your family, within your professional communities as well, to say, okay, how do we continue this even past February? And so next slide. Now and how about the next one? Looking at time. So thank you for everyone who's come here today. You are free to join the AAIDD Religion and Spirituality Interest Network. We welcome you. Everyone is welcome. It's interfaith. It's for everyone. If you're a professional or just a lay person, it is truly for everyone. And so you can join us on the AAIDD website. We have our own website too, Facebook and Twitter. And so you are free to join us there to continue the discussion and to learn more. So on behalf of AAIDD's Religion and Spirituality Interest Network, as well as the University of Minnesota's Institute on Community Integration, thank you so much for attending today's webinar. Now the webinar has been recorded and we will post that on our website. And so give us a little time and we'll put it there, and then you can review it again. You can share with your friends, and we encourage that. So we hope to see you on December 1st. And until then, take care. Thank you.